ambiguities in order to make major rifts or changes, and it warns against that. Now the beautiful thing, sorry Imran, the beautiful thing actually with this concept is that we don't find these major creedal differences within the mass of Muslims when it comes to those fundamentals. So in reality what we see is that it has worked. So somebody being violent, for example, would be 99.9% of scholarship, and people would be in agreement that this is outside the fold of Islam, that this is not permitted in Islam, to go and bomb a school bus or something and kill innocent people or whatever.
That's 100%, not even 99%.
Well, I would say 99.9% because you might find the one person who's actually not truly a scholar, a self-appointed scholar who brings certain verses together and then says, my interpretation, you can go and do this. But what I'm trying to say to you is that we would be more charitable when it comes to interpreting somebody's beliefs or somebody's concepts, whereby we would not look at the very extreme elements of that to somehow justify some commonality in terms of acceptance or belief. So sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So I would say that we have that as a protective aspect of the interpretation of the original revelation.
And we see that in a practical sense it's worked. That's the key.
The other aspect of it as a CEO is you would never want your original message to get lost.
Corrupted, yeah.
So that the preservation of that original message should always be there, because if you're the person below the one who's distributing, and that person says to you something, you think, oh, that doesn't sound quite, I'm not sure if this is, you can go and check the original message, because the message is there, and you can say, oh yeah, that makes sense. And
My question to you guys is, why leave the ambiguity at all?
Well, one of the hikmah, one of the beauties about Islam is that it is relevant throughout time. So there might be some instances where there's ambiguity, where the scholars will look at environmental issues and give a ruling specific to the needs of the people, and also looking at the original in terms of what might be, for example, good at one time may actually not take into consideration cultural changes over time, but that ambiguity may actually allow you to take those cultural sensibilities into consideration. So one example would be, at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, marriage was often, when a person reached puberty, they were considered a woman and they would be married. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that one of the aspects to judge such an issue would be cultural as well. So if the cultural norms were that the age was much older, then you should also abide by that. So it allows that flexibility. But we believe that this is from Allah's wisdom. And again, the ambiguity or the ambiguous verses do not affect the creedal foundational concepts of the religion. And they certainly do not extend to acts of what we would regard as criminality or violence. Those are very clear.
So there's a purpose for ambiguity as well. This is, you're asking about why not make it completely clear? Why leave no doubt? And so that the person no longer has a choice but to understand that I have to accept this and I. So one of the.
He's a bit of a stranger. He comes every year or something.
5 years, he says.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is really important to understand is the ambiguities aren't such that will lead to, like Abbas was saying, any major. Some of the things that people complain about, say even the warring between inter-Muslim warring, so Shia and Shia, the ambiguity doesn't lead to that. That's something else completely different. And as we were talking earlier, it's a political base force. The ambiguities are quite subtle, and they're there for a specific purpose, and that purpose is a form of test. And the test, and that's apparent from the verse. It says, because the people who have in their hearts this
disease, it says,
whatever that disease might be, they will use the ambiguity because ultimately they don't want to. So Islam is overarchingly means submitting your will to the will of the Creator. It's in a nutshell. And that means you believe in the Creator as the Creator describes himself, and you follow the messenger that comes to you and the ways of living in the world that will give you an ultimate paradise. This is sort of part of that. Now, ultimately, there are people who don't really want to submit. And you'll find it's amazing the myriad of approaches that people use to justify that lack of submission. So some people come, and usually the underlying root is something much more basic, like, I want to go out with this girl, or I want to take this particular drug, or I want to make money in it really quickly in this particular way, or whatever that might be, because that's a way of following your desires. And the Quran talks about, have you not seen the people who have made their desires their God? Because they're submitting to their desires, but not to the Creator. So other people bring intellectual things, like, I don't know, it's a common one that we see the atheists now. It's a modern thing atheists use, I follow science, and science is silent, so until science says something, like, I'm holding back. This is a way of submitting to the prophet of science, whether that might be Dawkins or Harris or whoever you're thinking about. But if you have these sorts of things in your heart, the ambiguities will amplify that. The person it ends up showing the true individual. Whereas if I see something ambiguous, my thought is, okay, this isn't quite clear. The next question in my mind is, what's more pleasing to the Creator that I do? And then you go down that route. Not what would I want?
And also, did the Prophet explain this? Did the companions explain this? Do we find this in Hadith? Now, if you reject all of that, then clearly you are a deviant. One other thing I just wanted to add very quickly is that even in a court of law, the law might be stipulated and recorded very accurately about a particular offence or activity or whatever, but you get two lawyers interpreting the law. So language itself has an element of ambiguity, or has an element of an ability to have some form of, let's say, interpretation.
So one is that it's a test. That's the meaning of the last thing. The other thing is that actually some ambiguity can be merciful, and I can't explain this. So there were cases where the people would come to the Prophet and they would ask him questions about something the Prophet would not answer repeatedly. And then the Prophet told one, and I can't remember the name of the person, but told them, look, the things I have not told you a clear answer, it means that you have a choice in this. You have a choice of your options. If you ask me to specifically give you one answer, it will restrict all of the choices.
Your life will become hard for you.
So you make the religion will become burdensome upon you. So some of that aspect of the ambiguity is to allow people in their lives to have as much autonomy as you can. So Islam only has a few things it restricts. Most things are allowed. So we're talking about alcohol, narcotics, we're talking about illicit sexual relationships, we're talking about ways of dressing, for example. These are a small number of specific prohibitions or stipulations on this is how you act, but the rest of it is fine. You want to go and eat this, you want to go out here and have fun and do this, no problem. But as long as these things are not part of that, you're okay. So there's a lot of freedom actually given, and restrictions are quite small. Long answers again, so my apologies. So sometimes, the ambiguity is not in the real things that will give you salvation. They're in the application that you have of the rules to your life in the world.
And I think more importantly as well is that Allah is telling us Himself that I have deliberately created this scripture where there are explicit verses, and these make up the foundation of your religion. And then there are ambiguous ones. And then Allah tells us, and the people with a disease in their hearts will turn to those ambiguous verses. So Allah is telling us that this isn't something that we've now discovered afterwards, that, Allah got it wrong, astaghfirullah, we don't say that. But Allah is telling us Himself that this is how I've constructed this scripture, and this is the reason why I did it the way I did. So, yeah.
Is this taking your time into consideration? We've spoken a lot.
Yeah.
I think the main purpose really is to let you know what we believe as Muslims, that there is only one Creator, and that God has sent many prophets into the world with the same message, to worship God alone without partners. And the final message is Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, he comes with the same message as all of the previous prophets, to worship God alone. Even Jesus says in John 17:3 that this is eternal life, that they may know you, talking to the Father, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom He has sent. So even in the biblical narrative, it's clear that there is one true God who is the one that we should be worshipping. And all what we're giving you is, because you're in this fascinating field of looking at the Sunni-Shia conflict.
We're actually quite fascinated, because I do get very fascinated that Western people who actually don't have necessarily like a dog in the race, they're not really, immersed in this concept of religion or Islam or Arabic, and then you really go out your way to just, you know, it's quite interesting actually. Yeah.
I think it's presumptuous of me. I think you're being given an opportunity. There's access to something that most people in America probably wouldn't have access to.
Yeah.
And you're looking at the largest religion in the world, essentially, 2 billion people now, probably, if not on par with Christianity, soon to exceed Christianity in terms of numbers. Literally a fifth to a quarter of the world's population. And all they're saying to you is really worship God alone without partners. And this is the key core of the message. So you have access to people whose lives are affected by some other political thing, but they have this theological background. And I'd really love you to look into it. Because I think if you did, and you analysed it, I think it would become apparent that this is, you know, the way.
And I think it would help you with your studies as well, because
Phenomenally, yeah.
because